Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the British Columbia Museum Association webinar. My name is Anissa Paulson, and I will be your host for today. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that the BCMA offices are located on the traditional lands of the Songhees and Esquimalt First Nations. We are grateful for the opportunity to live and learn here in mutual respect and appreciation. We also recognize the traditional lands of the many nations across British Columbia, where the work of the projects described in this webinar has been carried out. So today's webinar topic is reorg, creating order out of chaos in your collection storage area. And I'm sure none of you have chaotic collection storage areas, but for those of you who do, you will be excited to hear about the process that Netanja and Lorraine have been through at the Qualicum Beach Museum to create order out of their collection storage room. I'd also like to acknowledge and thank our webinar sponsor today, Lucidia. Lucidia is a software solutions company based in Richmond, BC, and they develop collections management software systems that are suitable for libraries, archives, and museums, both large and small. Lucidia's motto is redefine how knowledge is shared, which we feel is quite fitting for a webinar sponsor. So we thank Lucidia for supporting BCMA as we seek to share knowledge through our webinar series. As I mentioned, I am Anissa Paulson, your host for today, and I am BCMA's program officer. If you're having any technical issues, please call me on my cell phone and I will try to assist. You can also try to call our office, and our operations manager, Vanessa, may be able to assist you as well. Okay, so before we begin, if you're reading this slide and hearing me talk, you're doing great. If not, give me a call or text and I can try to help you. And throughout the webinar, if you do have any questions for the presenters, feel free to use the chat button. You may have to use your mouse to scroll or to kind of hover over the top of your screen or the bottom of the screen to have the menu bar show up, but there is a chat button that you can type your question into. Netanja and Lorraine have a lot of great information for us today, so we expect this webinar to take the full hour, but please feel free to ask questions at any point during the presentation, but we will also have some time at the end, specifically reserved for question and answer. Lastly, I sent out an email just now to the webinar registrants with a link to some of the reorg resources that the Canadian Conservation Institute have put together. And Netanja and Lorraine may be referring to them during the webinar. I thought it would be good for you guys to have that link in advance. Okay, so this month's presenters are Netanja Waddell and Lorraine Bell. And there are their beautiful pictures in front of their museum. So Netanja is the Qualicum Beach Museum and Archives manager. And she has been there for over 8 years, administering, digitizing, and expanding the archives and creating numerous exhibits, school programs, and engaging community in several museum projects. Netanja completed a bachelor's degree in Archives and Record Management at the Université de Montréal, and following a practicum with the City of Victoria, she secured several contracts with institutions preparing to comply with the new Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act. In her current position, Netanja has been successful in overseeing the ongoing implementation of a 5-phase revitalization plan and has been instrumental in establishing a strong relationship with community groups, local government, and the media. And Lorraine is the office administrator at the Qualicum Beach Museum. She has been there since 2015, and her responsibilities include museum administration and managing the museum's collection of social history objects. Lorraine has a master's degree in geography and is working on a PhD thesis right now in adult education, investigating small museums as agents of social change. Lorraine has effectively managed projects such as the Discovery Center, Relative Energy Interactive Display, the installation of new collection storage units, and rehousing of the collection, and developing their virtual Museum of Canada exhibit, Paleontology on Vancouver Island. Along with their Qualicum Beach volunteer, Kathy Dobison, Lorraine participated in the reorg training program, which was a very rewarding learning experience. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Netanja and Lorraine. And if you guys want to just click on that share button, you can go ahead and share your screen. Oops. I think we may have lost your audio, however.
Oh yeah, no, we're very quiet.
Yeah. Okay, here we go. Okay, we're here.
Yeah. Okay. How does that look? You can see it?
That looks great. We can
perfect.
see it, yep.
Yes.
I think you will just have to speak closely into your, sorry, I think you just have to speak closely into your microphone.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so, and we do have Kathy here, hopefully correcting or adding wherever needed. But I think I will start giving you a little bit of a background on the Qualicum Beach Museum. So the Historical Society behind the museum came into effect, was officially incorporated in 1984, and it was a group of locals that came together because they wanted to mark a big milestone, which was the 100th anniversary of the first land title that was given here in the area. And so they came together to make a big celebration out of that, and the society was then formed, incorporated officially, and they started operating out of a small brick building on the premises we currently are in, which is the original powerhouse of Qualicum Beach, and ergo our logo, which is the brick buildings. They are rare in our area of Vancouver Island, and so we thought it was a good way to have us identified to the general public. So the museum, as I said, the group operated out of that small brick building from 1985. And for the first 3-4 years, it was mainly out of that building. The town sort of supported them a little bit, and they also got some funds directly from BC Hydro, as it was an old BC Hydro compound. The current building that we're in, which is the larger brick building on the premises, is the original powerhouse of Port Alberni, and it was purchased by the society. And basically they purchased the bricks and the steel, and the building was reconstructed here on the premises by a slew of volunteers. And it's now that bigger brick building is where most of our exhibits and are housed. So we have a third building on the premises that was added in the year 2000, and it's the one we refer to as the annex. And that is where our both archival and artifact collections are housed. And the archives is on the second floor, but the collection is on the first floor. And I think it's definitely out of the need to organize that collection that this whole project was born, and led by Lorraine, I think out of a need to turn chaos into order. So second slide, I think. Yeah, there we go, chaos into order. So it all started with the opportunity to have a grant, if I'm correct, and we started working right there with reorg on the collection itself. There was always the aim to eventually have our professional shelving in there. What I should say is that there had always been volunteers who dealt with our collection, of course, accessioned artifacts. We had both a card locator system and the accession forms themselves in binders that were, fairly clearly identified. And the shelving that we have, although was static shelving, did have a location in terms of the bays and the shelves and the boxes. However, over the years, the finding aids had not been kept up, and as we retrieved artifacts from the boxes to put in exhibits, the paper trail did not follow the actual trail of the artifact, and therefore there was some not losses, but things got misplaced and were hard to locate and identify. And the database, so we have a current database system that came into play. Oh, there we have our buildings. So the annex is the small gray building that you see, and the two brick buildings on the forefront are where we have our actual exhibits. And the office of the is in the bigger brick building on the premises. Okay, I'm caught up. Okay, I was maybe speaking faster. I apologize. So here in the photos, you see at the top photo, look, you can see the collection with the old static shelving. Most of what we had, which I think is similar to a lot of small museums, was objects that were donated to us, as much in terms of the artifacts than in terms of how we could process and store them. So the shelving that you see in the background was a donation. And it was metal shelving at least, but in the same space was various utilities for the we had, I think Lorraine will get into the details of that, but a fridge and whatnot, which were big no-nos. But the happy smiling faces you see on the top is myself with our president of our Historical Society, Chris Lemfers, and of course our MP, Michelle Stillwell. And we're all smiling because we just received a big grant that will allow us to move forward. The bottom pictures is everything we moved and the start of the reorg process.
So as Netanja said, can everybody hear me? As Netanja said, we had done a lot before the reorg process, but we still had a lot to do, and we had accepted that we had a lot of roots at our collections challenges. We had been accepting things that were outside of our collections mandate, and so the previous work had clarified the collections mandate more specifically. We also had a large number of irrelevant objects that were accessioned by mistake. For example, I think there was a giant garage sale one year, and some of those items crept into our collection somehow. Display material, things like that. So we did go through that before we started reorg, but there was still quite a lot to deal with after. And then we also had large amounts of just non-historic material that had been accepted into the collection. So as we developed our specific collections policy, and then we're glad to receive a large grant for 3 professional shelves through the Canada 150 funding program. And we also aim to get climate control improved. And so we thought at that point we had just one more bank of shelves to go. No, I got it, yeah. So we applied to reorg, which has a Museum Assistance Program funding component, primarily because we're interested in the MAP funding for our last bank of shelving. And so reorg Canada is a storage reorganization training program organized by the Canadian Conservation Institute. And it's particularly focused at small and medium museums with limited resources and expertise to address their storage issues. And the methodology is used worldwide and was developed by ICRAM and UNESCO. And if you have a chance, you can look them up online, and there's lots of interesting examples. Stories of museums from around the world. Yeah, pretty fascinating. So I have to admit that for ourselves, we figured it would be a breeze because we had gone through that pile of work, which we'd already done, reorienting our collections policy, deaccessioning, moving the entire collection upstairs. Kathy remembers doing that, right? Installing new shelving and rehousing the collection. So we did do a self-evaluation based on reorg's 4 dimensions of storage, which is management, building and space, collection and furniture and small equipment. And somewhat to our embarrassment, our self-assessment revealed there was still a lot of room to improve our storage organization. And so we went on and took that training program. And as Anissa mentioned, the self-assessment and workbooks are available online, and you can try it out for yourselves as well. So over a year, we and the other participating museums from BC and the Yukon identified the key issues affecting the accessibility and conservation of our collection. And we also received mentorship from Simon Lambert from the Canadian Conservation Institute. And also as part of the course, we participated in a concentrated version of a reorg project with Parksville Museum, and also attended a reorg conference, which was also held at the Parksville Museum. And that was helpful to us because they're our close neighbors, so we could just drive there. And also we stayed in touch throughout our process and kind of supported each other in that way. And so it was quite helpful to actually participate in that project. And after we did it, we felt a lot more confident that we could do something similar. So how we organized the work, we spent fall and winter doing a more thorough assessment of the space and preparing the MAP grant. And come spring, we started the work of reorganizing the storage. And so here's what happened from summer 2018 when we had summer students to help us. So unlike the workshop in Parksville, which happened over the course of a week, we spent quite a long time, and it was often a process where new things would come up that we would have to figure out. For example, we found some very large objects that we had to find solutions for in the collections area. And so I would say for now, we're pretty much finished, except that we will never be finished. Our last big job to do is a final inventory and update the locations of the objects. Okay, so now I'll show you some more details about our condition report that we were working on in the fall and some of the issues that we identified. And Kathy, you can jump in if you have anything to add. Okay. So here are the 10 principles of reorg that make for a well-organized storage area. And so we'll just keep these in mind as I tell you about the condition report that we conducted. So just quickly, one person should be in charge, no objects on the floor, no pests, only collection objects in the storage room, and then finding separate spaces for other objects as much as possible or other materials. You should be able to locate objects in 3 minutes. It's nice if objects can be arranged by category and that the buildings and storage areas offer adequate protection. We were actually quite happy with the building. We didn't find a lot of problems on that level. For example, the roof didn't leak and there was no mold or anything like that. So that was pretty good. There was no holes in the walls or in the ceilings. No pests. We didn't find any pests so far. So the objects should be free from active deterioration and ready to use. And finally, there should be policies and procedures, and of course, they should be used. Okay, so one of the principles of reorg is that only collection material should be in the collection room. And we found that we had a lot of material that was not part of the collection in there. And another thing we found was, as I mentioned before, objects were accessioned that had no historical significance whatsoever. And so we had to deaccession those. And we did find some pretty weird stuff, like plastic fruit and things like that.
But we knew that that was going to happen, right? We had already an idea.
We had an idea we'd be finding that kind of stuff, yeah. Another problem we identified was that the collections room had a heavy multipurpose use, including storage and preparation of food for our membership events. And we discovered this was absolutely the wrong thing to do. So we got rid of the fridge and we banned all food from the area. And getting rid of the fridge also made room for the new climate control. And in this picture, you can also see there was a number of old didactics, and they were actually taking up a lot of space. And so what we did for those was we digitized them, and then we got rid of them. And finally, we were really keen to get our table back as a workspace, because as you can see here, it tended to be more of a storage space. Informal storage space. And then on the other side of that room, we also had an incomplete shelving project, as well as a lot of objects on the floor. And remember, another key principle of reorg is to have no objects directly on the floor.
No, I think it's going okay.
And here's some more issues we found. The more we looked into other storage areas, the more accessioned artifacts we found. And some of them were quite large and awkward, which led to kind of a challenge of where are we going to put them and how are we going to store them, with that principle that they should be in the climate controlled collections area. Yes, Kathy?
Well, and one thing that Simon, or that we learned in the reorg workshop, was how you can expand your storage space by going vertically.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, as Kathy said, here's the thing. We considered the area to be bursting, and that actual term was used often, that we were bursting at the seams, and at one point we did find it almost impossible to work in the space. You know, we were stepping over piles of stuff, and you know, we were getting maybe 3 artifacts put away in a session, and it was pretty challenging. But then when we started to really look with that methodology, we noticed there was a lot of unused space. So we started to think about how we could use the space more efficiently. And I think we also wanted to think about workflow and have specific shelves for objects in transition, either on their way back to storage or waiting to be accessioned. And I decided that objects waiting to be sort of moved on after they were deaccessioned, that they could be stored elsewhere, as they did have a nasty habit of sneaking back into the collection area. And here's some more unused vertical space, as you can see with the red arrows in the picture. There's that big chunky climate control in the way.
It was not really climate control, it was only a heater.
It wasn't good climate control.
So it was not climate control. That is one of the points that we made sure we were going to have going through reorg, was to have proper climate control in the building. Yeah,
it was just a heater. And also here are some other storage areas on site. We showed you the kind of picture of the whole area. And they were quite messy, with lots of accessioned objects hiding in there, and actually some quite lovely ones. And my favorite find was several crates of glass bottles with Chinese writing on them that had been found at a local mill site. And they had a piece of paper on them, and it said, "To be accessioned when time," and I think the date was 1986. So we finally found the time. Yeah. So here's the work plan, and for this we used some free online software called Floor Planner, and to draft up the floor plans and show the areas that needed work. And so you see here I've indicated that we need to remove the fridge, that's number 1, move the boxes off the floor and things like that, move the non-collection materials out of that area. Okay. And so we found that was a helpful way to communicate the sort of overall plan to others who were involved. And you can find that software at floorplanner.com. And it's not very hard to learn. We learned it in about an hour. What's up, Kathy?
No, the one thing is that I think we should make the point is, we don't have a separate, we have one building to put the collections and also for our work area. We don't have any separate space for that. Yeah. Okay, so we had to make sure that we could keep the collections area separate from our work area in that one space.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, so the table, that's the table that we want to keep clear, and you can see that this area here, this is kind of our work area. And so we had to kind of, because we didn't have a separate room, we kind of had to have a invisible boundary here and say, this is collections only. And then we had to kind of give a little bit, and this was going to be a containment area for non-collection items, because we had some that we couldn't store elsewhere. So we did manage to get most of them out, but we did make a little compromise and have that shelf for kind of nice display items too. So here's a floor plan of afterwards, showing the improvements we did. We repurposed some racks for our transitional area, and we built a new rack for our framed artifacts. We created space in the shelves for large objects, which helped get them off the floor. And we also found some areas where we could put pallets down for the large awkward objects, and so that would at least get them off the floor. And so these pallets were just put in front of that large shelving unit. And then this one we had custom built, so it just fit nicely into that space. Okay, so here are some after photos. And here's where we put the final bank of shelving. And you'll notice that the vertical space is more efficiently used for storage now. And we also got some locking drawers for added security for certain objects. As I mentioned before, the space has kind of a multi-purpose flavor to it, and there is quite a lot of traffic going in and out. So we just thought having the locking drawers was an added level of security that we could add to the collection. And these are our extra storage areas, and we totally clean them out so that we can store non-accession material there, such as plinths, glass, tables, paint, wood, old displays, anything we want to keep but isn't part of the collection. We try to keep in those other spaces now. And here's an example of some of the interesting objects we found hiding in the other storage areas. Quite lovely. So our goal was that, again, that the table remain clear as a workspace and not be used as a temporary storage space. And if you look carefully at the before photo, you can almost see our volunteers working in that pile of rubble. So, so we like it better when it's clear, for sure. So the shelves in the before photo, we moved those to another storage area, and we decided to use those to house deaccessioned objects awaiting removal. And in its place, we put a rack. We put a rack up so you can put lighter, flat objects onto it. We noticed that flat objects on shelves waste a lot of space. So if you put them up on a rack, you solve that problem and you get tons more shelf space. And as we learned in the reorg workshop, you can also use a pegboard on a wall for a similar space saver. But for us, we had those metal shelves in, and it was just this flat piece of metal. So we asked them at what's her names if they could put that up for us, and they said sure. Hi Cube. Hi Cube.
The company that gives us our shelving.
Yeah, the shelving company. Shelving. Yeah. So yeah, I'm getting to it. Yeah. And you can also see that we put the big objects in front, and we had put pallets down for those, so they were up off the floor. I kind of wish we had somewhere else to put them, but we don't, and so they're doing okay there. And we also got rid of the small shelves in the before photo, and we put in some higher shelves again to use that vertical space. And and then the shelf on the right was built by one of our team members to just fit the space we had left. So he carefully measured out so he could put a shelf in there that just used the maximum amount of space and go as high as possible. And then the summer students we had measured every framed object that was in our collection. And then David, the volunteer, put it in a spreadsheet to figure out what size to make the compartments. And it's quite nice because you can change the height of the shelves to suit your needs. So say the composition of the frames changes, you can make the shelves go a different size. And also you can see in the photograph that only the bottom half is wrapped in the museum grade ethafoam and tied up with twill tape. So we still have to wrap up the top half. And that makes the wood shelf more museum quality acceptable. And I was just thinking the ethafoam comes in really big rolls. So I wonder if you have a collection about the same size as ours, which is about 2,400 objects. If you had another small museum close by, you could maybe split the cost and still have a pretty good supply of that stuff. Just an idea. So again, for some larger objects, all we could do was put them on a pallet and get them off the floor. And the pallet was custom made to fit the space and then covered in the ethafoam. And we had two very long herring rakes, and so we put them on the wall, quite close to the ceiling. And that was good because they had been in a kind of precarious position before, and if they fell down, they could get broken, or they could actually injure us because they've got sort of metal spiky things sticking out of them, so they seem to be doing good there. We put these sort of plasticized hooks up, but then we wrapped up the hooks in ethafoam, so there was a barrier between them and the object, and then also tied them onto the hooks so they're nice and secure. Now the outboard motor, we just didn't know what to do with it, so Norm made a stand for it, and that worked out pretty good, except that it had kind of a strange odor, so we ended up making an exception for that one accessioned object, and we put it somewhere else. Smelled like gasoline. Diesel. Okay, so after we had finished the whole procedure, if you have any questions and want to go back to any of those photographs, I can do that. But after we had finished the whole procedure, we did another self-evaluation, and we marked ourselves super generously, as you can see. But I do think we did show quite a lot of improvement. And also, the nice thing about that self-assessment is you can always go back and read the questions, and they're quite specific. So you can sort of check in every once in a while and see how you're doing. Okay, work left to do. As I said, I don't think we're ever actually going to finish, because you just always have something extra that you might like to do to get better. But this year we do hope to finish the tasks I've written down there and put some pest monitors in to just double check and see if we have to take any further steps on that. We'd like to pay more attention to our fabrics section and do things there. And then just keep dealing with the accessions and deaccessions that we need to do. And I didn't mention the garage door, but the building does have a garage door that could be sealed better as well. So we'll get around to doing that pretty soon. Yeah, we don't really use it. Okay, so the main challenges, the main challenge I thought was dealing with a great deal more material than we initially thought we'd have. So we definitely had to think on our feet and just try and keep squeezing stuff in there. And also, at the same time, there were updates to the social history gallery in the main building. And so we were kind of working around storing a lot of material temporarily. I figured it out. We have had to really communicate with the organization about the area being a storage and collections workspace and not a storage space for non-collection materials, which can really slow down the process. And I think it might be nice to add a sign with those principles up in the collections area. And it's important to keep the other storage areas in good shape so that people have places to put things and aren't tempted to clog up the collections area. We also found timing to be a bit of a challenge. At the reorg workshop, we charted out the tasks really clearly, and we actually found ourselves stuck a couple of times because we were waiting for a shelf to be built or for a rack to arrive. And we didn't have that substantial of a swing space to store stuff while we were waiting. So sometimes we were kind of working around a lot of material, but we did our best and it worked pretty good. Well, as far as the assets went, we had a fantastic team of volunteers, and we also had skilled help in the form of a master carpenter. One good idea that we had was we had a student intern focus entirely on a mini project, which was the digitization of old didactics. And our concern about that was we didn't want to lose any material just in case, but we didn't want to store the didactics either. And so she just went ahead and digitized them all. So she took photographs and she also transcribed the material. And then just for good measure, she translated everything into French. So it turned out to be our first bilingual project that we've done. So that was kind of great. And then another asset that we identified quite by accident was that for the MAP grant, our time and the summer students' time spent on it could be considered matching funds. So that was quite helpful. We tried to share what we were doing with our board and members as much as possible, and I think that's a really important part of that process, and with the wider community by giving some tours and posting our progress in the media. And I think it's nice to share that kind of thing with potential funders because it's quite a tangible, visible process that you can share with others. So apart from tours, we also boiled it down to one slide that we could share at our AGM. And again, notice that we wrote down the key principles of reorg that helped us move our collection storage to a higher standard, and we think moving closer to professional museum standards. And here's just some tips that we got out of the process. I mean, again, we found it helpful to keep everyone in the organization informed about what we were up to. And I think even a short presentation at a board or membership meeting can help that along. It can also help you identify helpful skills or people interested in helping. We learned that the MAP program is generous with matching funds, and what I would suggest is if you want to apply for it, just phone them and ask them for pointers about that. We learned that acid-free boxes are expensive, and that you can actually take a regular banker's box and line it with ethafoam, and that can often be good enough for certain objects. And so that's another mini project we're doing right now, is carrying on lining those boxes with the ethafoam. And yeah, the whole business about the non-accessions material, it can really get out of hand unless you're quite strict about it. So we're trying to draw a line in the sand there and not let any other material back into that space. And I think the last tip was that we went to a workshop about deaccessioning, and that was really a nice combination to do with the reorg, because we were deaccessioning tons of material, and so it was nice to know how to go about that properly. And I think these are being shared via email, but just in case, here's two really good websites if you want to learn more about that methodology and give it a try yourself. So thanks for your time and listening to us. And if you have any questions, we'll try to answer them.
Thank you very much, everybody. It was great that Kathy was there, and Lorraine and Netanja. Thanks for sharing your experience. Please, everybody, feel free to type into the chat if you do have specific questions. How long did the process take you in total? Lorraine?
I think the bulk of it took about a year, from fall 2017 to fall 2018.
But I think it's really important to say that it really is an ongoing thing. It's ongoing, and I think it's important for small museums to really understand and realize that, because otherwise it's easy to get overwhelmed and get discouraged even, because, you know, some of our storage spaces are back filled with other things. You know, I know we have to go through one of the storage space, not where our collection is stored, but attached to that building, we have a little, literally, storage space. And, you know, cans of paints as we're doing renovations and all that get accumulated there. So it's almost like you have to assign at least once a year a regular blitz in some of your storage spaces and do a culling and, you know, so constantly be on top of that. I think I really want to make it clear, because I don't want people to think that everything is perfect here. We're constantly working at it. And I just wanted to say one thing about the climate control, is that because that is a huge expense. And the way we worked it in is that we made sure that it was part of our fee-for-service agreement with our municipality. So when we renegotiated our fee-for-service agreement, we knew we wanted to go towards making that building more professional, more up to the standards of museums for the collections, as well as the archives that are stored on the second floor. So we basically convinced the municipality that this was an asset and a plus, and it wasn't hard convincing them, and so they literally worked that aspect into the fee-for-service agreement for that 5-year span. And so one of the first items was to install climate control in the building.
So are you saying that your municipality paid for the installation of the new climate controlled system?
Correct. Yes.
Congratulations.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying, is that, and that's why you have the photo of I'm speaking to the mayor, and the mayor is there because, you know, he's coming to see where their funds are going, but very impressed and very happy to see that this is excellent use of the funds that are, supplied to us as a museum. Of course, we are the keeper of the history, and some of the artifacts, as Lorraine has pointed out, are quite priceless and unique. And so why not care for them, in the best possible way?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I also really like the photo at the beginning of your slide presentation with your local MP. So celebrating the moment when the grant came through, and getting that photo up, I think is really strategic and good advice for everybody as well. We have a question that came in here. What did you do with the deaccessioned items? And I think the deaccessioning webinar or topic is a entire webinar and workshop in and of itself. But the question goes on to ask if they were the deaccessioned items were taken to a dealer, and what about items not necessarily of interest to a dealer? Did you arrange a local sale, or can you just tell us more about what you did with all your deaccessioned items?
Yeah, okay, so we went to the deaccessioning workshop in Port Alberni, and we asked the curator of Port Alberni is here in the museum today, just by coincidence. No, Campbell River, sorry. Yeah, so what did we do with them? Some of them were just, a great number of them were just nothing that anybody would want. They were mistakes that were accessioned, so we deaccessioned them and we just threw them away, really.
Such as plastic fruit.
The plastic fruit is always the example, but just nothing anybody would want. And so we just, we went through the process of deaccessioning everything with the board, and then they were discarded. If they were an interesting object, we would transfer it to another museum.
Yes,
there was a local museum. Yeah, there was
to Cumberland and Parkville. Yeah.
So there was quite a lot of transfers to other museums. We sent some, no, we learned that. We sent some to auction, public auction, the Killip stuff, and some of it found its way into a vintage sale that we were having, but we've since learned that we should have been more careful about that. So,
and we also learned
you're not supposed to do that.
Because we also thought that it was proper to offer it back to the owners, or the donors rather, and we have learned through the workshop on deaccessioning that that is not something we do either. So
yeah,
continue to learn.
Learning curve.
So when you mentioned the vintage sale, the question was followed up by the fact that this museum would like to do that too. So can you talk a little bit about?
Yeah, so we did. Okay, so for our vintage sale, we put a call out for people to donate non-historical yet vintage items for our vintage sale, but objects from our collection do not go in the vintage sale.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let me make that clear.
Yeah.
So that was just a separate sale, not associated with this process.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we made a mistake with one or two objects that had been from the collection, but it was a mistake and we shouldn't have done it.
Well, actually, some of the items that ended up were not clearly identified as accession, and that's why they made their way in. And anyways.
Yeah, no, we got into trouble with that, and we've had to really double down on our taking care of the deaccessions and not having them be part of the jumble fundraiser stuff. Yeah.
And it's an advantage of living in a small community. People that came to our vintage sale might recognize things.
They'll let you know. What the heck is that doing?
We gave this to you guys.
Yeah, which is precisely why you have to be careful. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So sorry to keep belaboring this point, but for example, if you had some antique books that you wanted to deaccession, but perhaps your dealer wasn't necessarily interested, your local antiques dealer wasn't interested in them, do you have a recommendation on what one could possibly do with them to get them out of your collection?
From the workshop, Anissa, I think they either go to public auction or be donated to another public organization.
Non-profit organization.
Or they be just
discarded.
Disposed of, yeah. Our understanding from that workshop was that you cannot sort of gain from something that's been donated to your museum and accessioned as property.
Yeah, you can't make funds. You can't.
Yeah, it's just not permitted to use it for fundraising.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's such a interesting and hot topic for sure. And just so everybody knows, there is a deaccessioning webinar planned in October. So go ahead and register for that. There was some pretty extensive research done over the past year by the Alberta Museums Association, and they are going to be reporting on their findings as related to the ethics and protocols of deaccessioning. So look for that webinar opportunity to come in October, and that might be another place to pose some of these questions.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely learned that we had to be very careful with that, and it's something to do with being a registered charity and accepting and the property transfer and stuff. So yeah, you don't want to be just selling off your deaccessions, or it's just not the proper thing to do. Yeah.
There was another question that came in about just clarifying what you mean by the term didactics.
Oh, like information panels that we had developed for exhibits?
For past exhibits.
Okay. So anything that you had used for exhibits, like I think on one of the pictures that I saw, there was some kind of exhibit text pasted on a poster board.
Mix of text and photos or images, and so we basically just took photos of these big didactics, digitized them, and kept that for the value of the information they contained. But they were not necessarily professionally made didactics, so there was no use in using, keeping them, and they would take up so much space. So we just kept the information they contained.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. And I guess I just have a question too about, like, as you were going through this process and embarking on the process, what's your advice on finding room to do the work? Because you have this one storage space, you were trying to reorganize everything. You mentioned, I think, that you had to move everything. Did you move everything totally out of the room in order to install the shelving, and how did all that work out?
Yeah, so we kind of approached it differently than some museums in that we had already had that shuffle from the shelving, right? And so when the shelving came in, we used the archives space upstairs as our swing space. And what we did was we just carefully covered the bookshelves and everything with, covers, and that's where we stored the collection. And then we used other spaces as swing spaces for larger objects. Totally cleaned the area, painted and things like that. And then we put those shelves in, and then we rehoused most of it back. So it was a little, Anissa, then. Anissa, did you participate in the reorg in Parksville?
Yes.
Yeah, so they, remember, they closed the museum, and they used their exhibit space as a swing space. And they could do that because their timeline was a week, right?
Right.
And so tons of people to help them, and so they just marched everything out and put it on tables and did that kind of thing, and then did some conservation work at the same time. But we just that's
the reality, or that's a realistic situation for most people. So I was wondering how you handled it over the course of the year.
Yeah. So what we did was we used those swing spaces that I showed you, and we used as much of those as we could as temporary storage. But we kind of chunked ours out into mini projects and did it that way, because there were certain artifacts that we didn't want to leave in those spaces for very long.
Sure.
So we kind of prioritized the objects and the areas we would work on. And the ones that were of less concern, well, they could stay in the swing spaces a bit longer. But none of our swing spaces were climate controlled except for our lovely work table. Absolutely covered in objects for quite some time. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it was very iterative for us, and we were often, just shuffling around and waiting for shelves to come. And then as a new unit would be put up, oh, thank goodness, we can now use that as a swing space kind of thing. So I don't know if it was the best way to do it, but that's how we did it. Yeah. We were kind of confined. We didn't have a lot of swing space to use. At one point, we thought if we do something in the summer, we had some tents, and we thought we might put some tents up and do something for, a day. and get it done that way as well. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's good to know that it's possible in a small space, for sure. The Bulkley Valley Museum just sent in a little note about their experience, that they use their exhibit space because their museum closes for a month in January, or
Yes.
actually closed their museum for a month in January when things were slow, and then used their exhibit space in order to reorganize their collection when their shelving units were brought in. And there's a question now, following your comment on busting at the seams. What was your capacity to grow your collection before the reorg and then after? Have you planned for the growth of your collection as well?
Oh, do you mean in terms of, oh, you know, the thing is that we have loads of space now.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, now we've got those shelves.
We've got more space than we thought. I don't know if I showed you some pictures, but we've got lots of empty shelves and things. I mean, for us, I think the main challenge is the larger objects, but for smaller objects, we'll be okay for the next little while, I think.
So you were busting at the seams before, but then through the process of this reorganizing and kind of categorizing similar sizes on shelves and just kind of cleaning up, you've actually increased the storage space that's available to you.
Yes, I think we have, yeah, by a lot.
There's empty spaces on the shelves, right? So yeah, we realize, but I think it's a double thing, reducing our collection, getting rid of things that don't belong in the collection, and better use of the space available.
And that's definitely the better use of the space makes a huge difference, because just last week, remember, we had this big object, we found a space for it just by reorganizing.
And we have, one of our volunteers is particularly handy with the rubber mallet and those new shelves. You can adjust the shelf, you know, and so he'll just go in there and rubber mallet it to death, and then suddenly we've got tons of space. Yeah. Yeah, so flat objects sitting on a shelf, it's surprising how much room they take up that they don't need to take up,
Mm-hmm. One more question that came in. How do you recommend storing archival materials such as photos, maps, and documents?
I'm going to pass this to Netanja, our professional archivist.
Okay.
So we separate those items. So we really do have a clear division between our archival material and our artifact collection. And it's all in the same building, but it's on two separate floors. So anything that is photographed, anything that is archival in nature, so information, photos, maps, plans, blueprints, documentation is all stored upstairs as part of our archival collection. So we have a map cabinet up there. We have filing cabinets that have our photographs that are in acid-free envelopes and whatnot. And they are actually all part of the same system of database, but they have their own unique sub-databases in terms of for finding aids, if that makes sense.
Okay, so that area and that collection was not necessarily part of this particular project?
No.
Okay.
No, if anything, the archives was already sort of, I wouldn't say completely under control, but it was definitely an area that had been given more attention early on, and that was already under a system of accessioning and using finding aids. And when we first acquired our database system, it was to add the archival collection on it, and then we added the artifact collection later down the road.
Okay, thank you for that. Another tip came in through the chat about the polyethylene foam rolls, that Uline is a good source, U-L-I-N-E. The Bulkley Valley Museum said they purchased one big roll, and it was great for everything from lining tables when working with collections to lining shelves, and also
very timely comment, as we just received a huge catalog in the mail the other day from them.
From Uline?
From Uline, yeah.
Yeah.
There was
and I guess, go ahead.
Sorry. There was another participant, and I think it was the Yukon Arts Center, and they had a really nifty way of putting their ethafoam rolls on the wall.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they're really bulky, but they had a really good method for doing that.
It was some kind of a hanging system that went through the center of the ethafoam, and you could just pull the ethafoam down and cut the piece that you needed. It was really cool. But you had to have the space up top, obviously, too. And some pretty sturdy, I don't know, hooks to hang that on.
Good use of that vertical space, however.
Yes. But we store ours under the work table. The roll just fits under the work table. And as long as you don't have other stuff in there crowding it out, you're good.
Perfect. So it looks like we're 5 minutes away, and I invite other questions to come in through the chat. But while we wait for other potential questions, you guys mentioned the Museum Assistance grant program through Canadian Heritage, which is a great resource for these kind of projects. And I was wondering if you had any advice for people who might be considering applying. I think the deadline is November 1st. This year, so there is time to look at that application and apply if anybody's interested in embarking on a collection storage project like this. But I was wondering, do you guys have any advice?
I'm pretty sure I'm pretty sure they have a storage kind of grant that they do. The grant we applied for was a smaller grant, but it was directly associated to those who participated in the reorg program. And so that was nice. But I think either way, they're very helpful at explaining what funds can be considered matching. And for us, that was a big deal, trying to figure that out. If you phone them, they'll help you do it. And then the application is quite involved though. So start early, I guess. That's the best advice I have.
Do you think that self-assessment tool that you mentioned at the beginning is a good?
Sorry?
I was just wondering if the self-assessment tool that you mentioned at the beginning would be something that would be a valuable addition to a grant application through the Museum Assistance Program.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah,
that would probably be a very good thing to do. And I think they have it online. So you can just go through it and do that. Then it helps you target where you want to do the work. Even if you don't want to do a whole reorg, you could identify the areas that need the most attention,
And in terms of matching, we often, with the support that we receive from our municipality, try to use that as our matching, whether it's in kind in terms of their support or actually financial, so then if we combine the two, it just gives us more weight sort of to the application and more stability, I think.
Great. Just one last comment that came through about MAP only funds museums with at least one paid staff. Do you know, I'm thinking, is that still true? I can't recall.
I think it is, and it has to be, well, I don't know, no, it's not one full-time staff, right? It's just one paid staff?
I think the equivalent of
one. The equivalent of one full-time, I think that's what we figured out, because Lorraine and I are both part-time, but together we form one full-time employee.
Creative.
Makes sense, if that makes sense?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'm sorry we don't have any other advice for what other volunteer-owned and operated museums do, except lobby your municipality and see if there's any way to encourage them to hire one paid staff, and then you would be able to apply for, doors would open with one paid staff for sure to the number of grants you could apply for.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you so much, you guys. I'm going to take over again here and just say thank you. And thank you everybody for joining us today. And just a note to Netanja and Lorraine that BCMA will be sending the Qualicum Beach team their very own BCMA mugs. So congratulations. Wait for those to appear in your mailbox soon. And for everybody out there, please feel free to join us in August for our next webinar. It's Tuesday, August 20th, and it's on the topic of Indigenous cultural heritage, and it's an open discussion with Karen Arid from the First Peoples Cultural Council and Angie Vane from the Union of BC Indian Chiefs, which is a very powerful team and moderated by Luann Neal from the Royal BC Museum. So it will be a really great open discussion. Everybody can just send in their questions that they're dying to know in advance, and Luann will be just having a conversation with Karen and Angie. So stay tuned for more information about that. We'll be making that announcement and clarifying that process in the weeks to come. If you have any suggestions for other topics for webinars or wish to present one yourself, please do let us know. And then fill out our survey, which will be arriving in your inbox soon. And of course, lastly, if you are not already a member of the BCMA, please consider joining us and staying connected. Mark your calendars as well for our annual conference, which is happening in Prince George on September 30th. Okay, thanks again, everybody. And just as a follow-up to this webinar, I will be resending the links that Lorraine and Netanja had mentioned to the ICROM resources. A reminder of the deaccessioning workshop in October. I can also send a link to the MAP grant application and that information, and the Uline. So look for that to come into your mail inboxes soon. And thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.